Hello, it's been a little while, hasn't it? And it's good to be back. I'm just going to do a little video on the Tea Party, and it's entitled, it's going to be something like Old Tea Party and New. And this is going to be a comparison contrast between the Tea Party of the 1770s versus the Tea Party of today. Now, the Tea Party of the 1770s, to be very clear and accurate, was a Tea Party that predated the what I would call the independence phase of the American Revolution. In other words, the colonists were loyal to the crown. There was no the arguments were with Parliament. The independence meme was floated by Tom Paine, and Tom Paine was what we would today consider to be kind of a radical. Okay, he was very much against the hierarchical structure of the English system. The Tea Partiers of the early 1770s were headed in that direction. They were the Patriots, and they were also critical of many aspects of that rebellion, but, pardon me, many aspects of the system, okay, that they were rebelling against key aspects of the system. They were not yet independence-minded. They did, however, believe very firmly and the idea that there is no taxation without representation. And that was the essential right and liberty of a subject of England, a loyal subject of England. In other words, somebody who was a loyal subject of the king, that they would not be taxed without their consent. Okay, liberty that goes back before the time of the Enlightenment, even into the Middle Ages. Okay, so that was the Tea Party in its context. It was about taxes, yes, but it was not obsessed with taxes. Taxes were not the central focus of the Tea Party. The central focus of the Tea Party was this issue of taxation connected to representation. Why is it that there is no taxation without representation? Because if you are taxed without being represented, you are a subject. You're not a loyal subject. In other words, a loyal subject means that you voluntarily give your consent to the king, that you are the king's loyal subject. You're not a slave. You're not a serf. You are a loyal, free subject of the king. Okay? And that requires that if you are taxed, that you have a degree of say in it. Now, that was honored in the breach. If you know your English history and your American history, most common people were not represented. It was, in both societies, it was very much of a landowner society. Both societies were hierarchical. In Puritan Massachusetts, with the congregational model of government, both in church and state, you had something that approached more of a democratic system. You had, by the 1770s, a move away from the idea of a society run by the gentry toward more and more of a democratic type of society. Even in the South, you had that model arising. You had slaves being freed, and there was not like the 19th century where there was extreme virulent racism. That was starting to disappear by the 1700s. We actually had a step back in the 1800s in that area. Okay. So what's my point here? My point here is to give a sense of historical context to the original Tea Party, where the original Tea Party was you might say it was about taxes. In a lot of ways it was, but it was about the standing of individuals in a hierarchical society and maintaining that standing that you would call a freestanding. And the idea was being planted. By the time of the Declaration of Independence, the idea was being planted that whole idea of a hierarchical society was a bad idea. And the most extreme radicals, like Paine, wanted to just dispense with the English system altogether and go to a pure democracy. The Constitution was, in a way, a step back to what we had in England. It was a mixed system where wealth and power would have a lot of control. And let's not go with any illusions about that. The early republic was, in a way, a step backward toward what the model that we supposedly dispensed with in England. And sure enough, one of the assurances in the Constitution is if there was a runaway slave, they'd be returned. Okay. So, and that assurance, and there was great resistance to that idea on the local level of anti-federalists in the North, of this idea of going back to some of what we had in England. Okay, so the Boston Tea Party, was it liberal or was it conservative? The answer is I don't know that we can necessarily juxtapose our modern ideas back onto it. On the one hand, it was liberal in the way that it challenged a hierarchical society and enfranchised ever larger numbers of people. But on the other hand, it wasn't so radical. It was led by men of property. And you could argue that, well, certainly modern conservatives are a lot more libertarian than 18th century conservatives. And so they're very much more attached to the idea of, let's say, individual freedom than conservatives were centuries ago. So you could say that it had some conservative ideas as we would understand them today, but I don't know that any side of the spectrum can claim a monopoly on ideas from the early republic, and that's because all sorts of ideas were represented even then. The modern day Tea Party does not seem to be about taxation without representation. It seems to be more about the issue of taxation in and of itself. It's a complicated phenomenon. You have different factions within it. I think the Ron Paul faction within it is probably the original Tea Party was more of a Ron Paul type phenomenon. And by the way, he's more libertarian than he is conservative. At least that's how he seems to me. But you obviously have a big tent that the overarching unity is opposition to President Obama, very clearly. And the most diehard Tea Partiers are also opposed to what you might call government in the economy. Now, I think there were some Tea Partiers who are not so extreme about that, but again, it's a mixed group. But at the end of the day, I think the real point of this video I want to say is that they can call themselves a Tea Party because anybody's going to call themselves something that's traditional to a culture. I mean, there was a Democratic website, tompaine.com, and they'll claim the mantle of Thomas Paine, rightly or wrongly. I would say Tom Paine had a lot of ideas that today would be Democratic Party ideas. Then again, he might have some other ideas that would not be. So generally, as a general rule, I would say Tom Paine had ideas that can be claimed more by the left, but maybe not entirely. But be that as it may, I would say in the case of the Tea Party, it was a broad phenomenon that included a lot of different philosophies that would file into it. Philosophies that probably were unified in their opposition to the idea of a crown or a parliament that ruled people without their input. And I think that today we have a Tea Party that is more about the taxation part of it. And what they want is obviously less taxation. Now, the question I would have for the Tea Partiers of today is, if you're going to claim the mantle of the Tea Party of old, the Tea Party of old believed in a kind of unified society, a society that was unified around the idea of a new system of self-government. For the Tea Partiers of today, do you hold to that same view? Do you believe in a unified society around the idea of self-government, or is it more about you? Is it more about your own personal holdings, your own personal property, your taxes, your sort of individual sphere here? And I might ask the same thing of the liberals. Liberals have often advanced in the social sphere a kind of radical individualism that I kind of wonder how healthy that's been. I think there's a case that can be made that applying the First Amendment to pornography was not such a good idea. I mean, I think a case can be made that no-fault divorce was not such a good idea. So, but in this particular video, I'm mainly focusing it on Tea Party conservatives, and that is, I think your forebears, if you're going to claim that the 1770s Tea Partiers were your forebears of old would have thought of the whole picture in society. And the question I have for you is, do you think of the whole picture in society? And I'm just going to leave it at that. You're welcome to comment. You're welcome to defend your position. I have to say that at this point, I'm skeptical that the modern Tea Party really does resemble the Tea Party of old. Thank you.